Great. Well, thank you, Alan, for the introduction, and thanks to Barry for the opportunity once again to speak at the USEA State of the Industry Forum. And, you know, I think that the theme of the day has been that it's a remarkable time across the board for U.S. energy. As we think about the combination of our resource base and technology and what has happened with oil and natural gas production, as what we've heard is happening in terms of renewables, what's happening on batteries, across the board, the combination, I think, of technology and innovation and free markets is doing wonderful things for U.S. energy and, quite frankly, for global energy. On the natural gas front, you just heard from our good friend Karen Harbert, and I think what's interesting here is that a lot of what you're going to hear from me, and my guess is that a lot of what you're going to hear from Dina and Charlie in the next segment is going to be very, very similar. And that's remarkable because as I look out at the audience, and I know who you are, there are certain people here who your first exposure to the natural gas industry was when we were fighting like cats and dogs against each other rather than working together. So that's been a remarkable transformation. One of the things I think that has changed is that we're not only talking about natural gas in the context of the United States or North America, we are talking about it globally. According to EIA, 1/3 of global energy demand will be for natural gas through 2040. If you think about the fact that there are 850 million people globally who still lack electricity, it's a tremendous opportunity for the U.S. natural gas abundance to contribute to solving that energy poverty issue in a clean way and in a way, as Karen said, that has multiple benefits for the United States. And also, while on the topic of energy poverty, let's remember there still are some communities in the United States that are not served with natural gas. And that's an important point in terms of the continued need to expand our natural gas infrastructure, and also, as Karen said, the ability to utilize new technology to provide the most efficient gas appliances for consumers. Here in the U.S., natural gas now accounts for 31% of our domestic energy consumption and 35% of the electric generation portfolio, which is a dramatic shift. Karen also talked about the dramatic increase in natural gas production, and I looked at it all in a slightly different way. You know, for those of us who have been part of or exposed to the industry for quite a while, you may recall that in the mid-1980s, marketable natural gas production in the United States dropped to about 16.9 trillion cubic feet. I think that's probably about the 50-year low of marketed natural gas production. In 2018, that number had jumped up to 32.8 trillion cubic feet. Think about it, a near doubling. And as Karen said, no end in sight. And I think that also, you know, highlights what's important for INGAA and our members, which is natural gas infrastructure, and in particular, transmission pipelines and storage, which are really the key to taking advantage of that natural gas abundance. While we've all got a stake in this, I would say that the role of pipelines and the ability to expand pipelines on a predictable basis is a lot of what has enabled us to take advantage of our energy abundance. And if you think about it, where you've got pipeline constraints, whether it's upstream or downstream, upstream it means the producer has got to accept a lower price and less incentive to produce. Downstream it means that consumers are paying much more for their energy than they otherwise need to. So there are clear benefits to having an adequate, robust pipeline infrastructure that can respond to market demand. Let me now shift to methane and climate change, and the slide features some of the leaders of the House Energy and Commerce Committee. And we know that earlier this year, the majority on the committee produced their climate framework as a result of some of the outreach that they did last fall. And one of the points that I want to make here is that often the choice is posed as natural gas or renewables. And I've got to tell you that's not the answer. The answer is natural gas and renewables, both as you look at the role that natural gas has already played in terms of reducing emissions, and if you look at that complementary role that gas and gas-fired generation can play along with renewables, I think that there is a huge role for natural gas here in terms of providing a cost-effective way to integrate more renewables into our system. And then also to pick up on the point that Karen made, as we look at downstream and we look at residential and commercial and industrial consumers, rather than looking at displacing natural gas, let's look at how we can utilize technology to consume gas more efficiently and achieve our goals, and at the same time take advantage of that tremendously robust infrastructure that we've got in this nation, and I think is one of our huge advantages. With regard to INGAA's members and methane, like other associations, our board has made a commitment with regard to methane emissions reductions. Our members are participating in a number of the industry efforts, whether it be One Future, whether it be EPA's Natural Gas STAR program, and also the fact that due to the overlap of membership, a lot of our member companies participated in the EEI AGA Natural Gas Sustainability Initiative. And on that, I've got to compliment AGA and EEI in that they reached out to us at a technical level so that we could provide input in terms of how would these metrics be applied and how could they be developed to be applicable to natural gas transmission pipelines. And I agree with Karen that we are moving toward coming up with a common metric that I think is going to put us in a much better place to document what we're doing, show that we're true on this commitment, and set goals for ourselves going forward. One statistic to illustrate what has happened on the natural gas transmission pipeline side, if you look at average methane emissions from natural gas compressor stations between 2011 and 2017, so think about it, a relatively short span, they've dropped by 23%. And so I think there are real tangible benefits here that we can point to. I think one of the things we need to do is to pick up on how can we communicate that more effectively in terms of making it relevant. Because think about it, the average consumer out there, if you say to them, emissions from a natural gas compressor station, they'll say, a what? So, we've got to work on how can you turn that into something that somebody's going to look at and say, okay, that's the equivalent of taking that many vehicles off the road, or that's the equivalent of planting that many trees or whatever, that will really bring it home to people what we have done and what we can do. Let me now turn to the Natural Gas Act. The Natural Gas Act, of course, as some of you know, really is kind of the holy grail for us. That's the statute under which FERC authorizes the construction of pipelines. It's the statute under which FERC regulates interstate natural gas pipelines in terms of their rates and conditions of service. There are some in Congress who have started to raise questions about the Gas Act and in fact have introduced pieces of legislation to examine pieces of it. And I think it is very, very important for all of us in the gas space, so when I talk about all of us coming together, to defend that statutory structure because of what it has done and what it has enabled. The Gas Act is very interesting. It's a New Deal era statute. It tends to speak in very broad terms. And part of the beauty of it is it has provided FERC with the ability, operating within that framework, to adapt its regulatory program to the dramatic changes that we've seen in this industry. When the law was enacted in 1938 and some of the amendments that came afterwards, nobody was thinking about open access transportation. Nobody was thinking about the shale boom. Nobody was thinking about this, but that framework and then providing FERC with the flexibility to exercise its discretion really has enabled us to adapt so much. And so I think that we really need, as this is being questioned, and I think quite frankly it hasn't been looked at for a long time, we need to go back to the basics, that this framework has served us very well and can continue to serve us very well in the future. For example, there is a bill that's introduced by Representative Custer of New Hampshire, and it was referenced in the Energy and Commerce framework, that would take Section 7H of the Gas Act, which is the eminent domain provision, and say that eminent domain could not be used on land that is owned by a municipality, a nonprofit like a land trust, or that is somehow transferred to them via, for example, a conservation easement. And think about how insidious that could be in terms of, okay, FERC does all the right things, looks at alternatives, considers the environmental impacts, the landowner impacts, pipeline safety, picks a route. Somebody along that route says, oh, let me give a conservation easement to the local land trust. What happens? Go and reroute the pipeline. Pick up the second best route. What happens again? trumped by that. So I think this is very, very insidious. I think that this could do a lot of damage, and I think it highlights the importance of us educating the Congress and taking them back to really the value of this statutory framework and why it has done so much for us, and why it can continue to do good things for us as we address the next round of energy challenges. Let me now shift to pipeline safety to pick up on another point that Karen made. Like the gas distribution utilities, for the interstate pipeline companies, safety is priority one. It is part of our social license to do business, and we are very much committed to it, that we are committed to the goal of zero pipeline incidents. Will we ever get there? I hope we do, but the point is we should be committed to getting to that perfect level rather than accepting something that is less. And also we are very committed to employing technologies and new engineering practices to make our pipelines safer and to avoid incidents. And it's very important that the pipeline safety rules that we have to adhere to, and for the natural gas transmission pipelines, it's the PHMSA rules, enable us to incorporate those new technologies and engineering practices into what we do. Because there are parts of the pipeline safety regulations that effectively have not been touched since they were first put in place in 1970. So that needs to be updated. And my hat's off to the regulators at PHMSA, the Pipeline and Hazardous Materials Safety Administration, for completing the long-awaited natural gas transmission rule last fall, for recently announcing that they have completed the storage rule, and also several other rulemakings that I think we're going to see this year. I think that Skip Elliott and his team at PHMSA have done a great job and deserve to be recognized for it. We also have the Pipeline Safety Act reauthorization pending this year. Pipeline Safety Act historically is reauthorized pretty much by acclaim. It tends to, pipeline safety is bipartisan. We find that the various stakeholders are able to come together on a consensus bill, and we hope that we can get there this year, although it has become somewhat more partisan. One of the issues that has crept into it, and I think this is indicative of how these issues are so cross-cutting, is the methane issue. And I've got to say, we've got to keep our eyes on the ball that this is a pipeline safety bill. There are things that can be done within the context of pipeline safety that can reduce methane emissions, and we're certainly committed to doing that. However, we don't want this to become an environmental regulatory bill where we lose that focus on pipeline safety. And I think that when things settle down, we will get there. I think that while it may take a little bit more time this to go around, that we're eventually going to come to that bill that will have broad consensus support and do the right thing for pipeline safety. Final thing I want to talk about is cyber and physical security, another issue that Karen touched upon. And of course, this also affects the whole resilience discussion in terms of the resilience of the gas delivery system and of course the interconnectedness of it with our electric system. I think it's important, whether you're looking at this from the context of where does the current federal oversight framework go, or for that matter, should Congress choose to wade into it, to avoid overly prescriptive solutions. That given the nature of the threats that we deal with here, given how rapidly they evolve, we want to have something that people are not looking in the rearview mirror towards compliance, but rather are looking forward towards what they can do to deal with threats. We believe that a well-managed oversight program, structured oversight program, can be very effective in mitigating the risks to the pipeline industry by providing flexibility and the ability to rapidly update our practices. And also, we are very focused on this interconnectedness with the electric power industry. As a matter of fact, last November, during the NERC RIDEX, there was unprecedented participation by the natural gas industry in that. And it really went back, and I have to take my hats off to NERC here, went back to the very inception of the exercise, that there was a recognition that in the scenarios that were put forth for the tabletop exercise, you ought to recognize the natural gas component and design that in. And then also in both the distributed play exercise and in the executive tabletop that I participated in along with some others that are here in the room, natural gas was a big part of it. And also we had a strong participation by members of INGAA, by some from AGA. I know that Karen was there for it. And I thought it was a very, very good experience in terms of opening our eyes to some things. And at the same time, I think on the part of both the electric power industry and on the part of those in the federal government dealing with this, recognizing some of the unique features of the natural gas system and that needed to be recognized there. And the effort continues. There are follow-ups to the GridX, as a matter of fact, and here's a term I hadn't heard before. In the next couple of weeks, we will, with NERC, will be doing a hot wash of the GridX exercise to go back and say, okay, what were the lessons learned and what are we going to do on that? And so I think we are very committed to following this through. We recognize that it is very, very important. And I think it's another indication of how, while we represent different segments of the energy industry, we recognize our interconnectedness and are working together. So with that, let me conclude. I think we've got great opportunities given our abundance of energy, and particularly given what natural gas can do to be part of the answers to our energy challenges and our environmental challenges. We also have some challenges to address. And also, I think, one point that I think has become increasingly apparent to us as natural gas has become a bigger part of the broader energy and environmental discussion. We need to do a better job educating about what we do and also putting it in terms that I think become very, very relevant to people. And that's something that we and other segments of the industry are very committed to. So with that, thank you very, very much for your attention. And thanks again to Barry for the opportunity to be here on behalf of INGAA.